2 Samuel 5. All the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron, saying, "Look, we are your flesh and blood. In the past, when Saul was our king, you were the real leader in Israel. The Lord said to you, 'You will shepherd my people Israel. You will rule over Israel.'" When all the leaders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, King David made an agreement with them in Hebron before the Lord. They designated David as king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned for 40 years. In Hebron, he reigned over Judah for 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem, he reigned for 33 years over Israel and Judah. Then the king and all his men advanced to Jerusalem against the Jebusites who lived in the land. The Jebusites said to David, "You cannot invade this place. Even the blind and the lame will turn you back," saying, "David can't invade this place." But David captured the fortress of Zion, that is, the city of David. David said on that day, "Whoever attacks the Jebusites must approach the lame and the blind, who are David's enemies, by going through the water tunnel. For this reason, it is said, the blind and the lame cannot enter the palace." So David lived in the fortress and called it the city of David. David built all around it. From the terrace inwards, David's power grew steadily, for the Lord God of heaven's armies was with him. King Hiram of Tyre sent messengers to David, along with cedar logs, carpenters, and stonemasons. They built a palace for David. David realized that the Lord had established him as king over Israel, and that he had elevated his kingdom for the sake of his people Israel. David married more concubines and wives from Jerusalem after he arrived from Hebron. Even more sons and daughters were born to David. These are the names of the children born to him in Jerusalem: Shemaiah, Shobab, Nathan, Solomon, Ibhar, Elisha, Nepheg, Japhiah, Elishama, Eliada, and Eliphalet. When the Philistines heard that David had been designated king over Israel, they all went up to search for David. When David heard about it, he went down to the fortress. Now the Philistines had arrived and spread out in the valley of Rephaim. So David asked the Lord, "Should I march up against the Philistines? Will you hand them over to me?" The Lord said to David, "March up, for I will indeed hand the Philistines over to you." So David marched against Baal, Perazim, and defeated them there. Then he said, "The Lord has burst out against my enemies like water bursts out." So he called the name of the place Baal Perazim. The Philistines abandoned their idols there, and David and his men picked them up. The Philistines again came up and spread out in the valley of Rephaim. So David asked the Lord what he should do. This time the Lord said to him, "Don't march straight up. Instead, circle around behind them and come up against the opponents. Come up the opposites, the trees. When you hear the sound of marching on the top of the trees, act decisively, for at that moment the Lord is going before you to strike down the army of the Philistines." David did just as the Lord commanded him, and he struck down the Philistines from Gibeon all the way to Gezer. Yeah, Gezer. Isn't that a fun name? From Gibeon until you enter Gezer. So, okay, it's just giving us a note on the word order there in the Hebrew, not what does Gezer mean. So we had King Saul has been defeated. Judah has made King David king over them. He's now gone against Judah. We had the fighting over an Abner dying, and then we had fighting, and are you going to kill all of Israel? And relief happening. And now as we continue the Israel, the northern tribes, all the tribes of Israel gather at Hebron and say, hey, look, when Saul was king, you really were the leader in Israel. You really were the one doing all the work. So I guess it's not so bad if you're the one who is king. I guess it's kind of like, yeah, you did all the work, so we're happy to have you as king. But they're also reminded that the Lord said to you, you will shepherd my people Israel. You will rule over Israel. Like, here's one of those things. Okay, so if you knew this, why did you resist it? If you knew this, why did you resist this? This is a common theme that happens throughout Scripture. People are in the know about what should happen or God has said will happen, and then they try not to go along with it, and then they eventually end up going and doing it. Jonah, another one of those examples of that. Like, yeah, I'm not down with that. Okay, we'll do that. So then the people of Israel as a whole tend to be along that trajectory as well. So all the leaders come to make him king at Hebron. King David made an agreement at Hebron. They designated David as king over Israel. And this is now how we have normally throughout the rest of the book, the listing of when the king took over, how long the king reigned, all of those things. We have this formulaic piece. So now we're getting to that for David. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned for 40 years. In Hebron, he reigned over Judah for 7 years and 6 months. And in Jerusalem, he reigned for 33 years over Israel and Judah. So you could see there, 7 years and 6 months added to 33 years. Well, that's 40 and a half. But they didn't say he reigned for 40 and a half. Also, when it says someone reigned for 40 years, we don't have to automatically assume that's literal 40 years. 40 years, when it is talking about the reign of a king, is a nice round number, talking about the stability and the blessing that God has given through that king often. So we have that in the book of Judges, where a judge comes and delivers them, and then there's a reign of peace for about 40 years. So it is the reign of God is symbolized by 40 years. So 40 is often a number of testing, but 40 can also be a number that is showing the stability of something taking place. Then the king and his men advanced to Jerusalem. So now Israel is on their side. Now he's going to go up against Jerusalem. And the Jebusites insult him. You can't invade this place. Even the blind and the lame will turn you back. Like, what a arrogancy. Even our blind and lame people can turn you away. And then saying, David can't invade this place. David can't invade this place. I don't know why. I just see, like the schoolyard, nanner, nanner, nanner. Yeah, the numbers in the Bible are interesting. Yeah, they are. But David captured the fortress. Like, they're not even going to, they don't even, it's so insignificant of, the taunt is more powerful than the actual defense was, because they're not even giving us it took David this long, and he did all these. Nah, David captured the fortress. Nanner, nanner, you can't get us. Oh, you did. It's just boop, we don't need any of that story. He did it. David said on that day, whoever attacks the Jebusites must approach the lame and the blind, who are David's enemies, by going through the water tunnel. For this reason, it is said the blind and the lame cannot enter the palace. Okay, so there is some confusion about the witnesses concerning this word. The katib in the call perfect third common plural, they hated, referring to the Jebusites' attitude towards David. The kir is the call passive participle construct plural, hated, referring to David's attitudes towards the Jebusites. Hated, the subject of which should be the soul of David. The difference is minor in translation. Okay. So there's a little bit of what exactly, but I think we get the gist of it. The blind and lame will not enter the palace. Why are we mentioning the palace? Enter the house takes place. Okay, the Lord's house. Okay. The temple isn't built yet, so to have the blind and the lame not being able to enter the temple, they already can't. So that's not something that would be. So it does make more sense saying the palace. However, he doesn't have a palace built, but the next thing that's going to be built is the palace. So we get the reason why they can't enter here is because of the Jebusites and their taunting that the blind and the lame could defeat David's armies. Okay, so David lived in the fortress and called it the city of David. David built all around it from the terrace inward. David's power grew steadily, for the Lord of God's, or God of heaven's armies, was with him. King Hiram of Tyre sent messengers to David along with cedar logs, carpenters, and stone masons. They built a palace for David. What do we have in the footnote there? A house. Yeah. Well, the literal word would translate as house, but since we know it's a king, palace is a good translation. So why would the king of Tyre come and do this? To get David as an ally. I'll go build your palace. Now we're buds. Now you won't attack me. So he builds the palace. David realized that the Lord had established him as king over Israel and that he had elevated his kingdom for the sake of his people, Israel. So we have all of David being elevated. David's realizing it, and he's realizing what the sake of it is. And then we have this statement right afterwards, like, how is this in line with what that last statement was? Hey, Rayzone, good to see you. David married more concubines and wives from Jerusalem after he arrived from Hebron. Even more sons and daughters were born to David. So if you recall, and one of the last things we had before he took over as king was a list of 6 wives and 6 children. And then also he was having Michal, his wife, Saul's daughter, returned to him, which would make wife number 7. Now we're learning he has more wives and concubines. It doesn't give us their names, but now it has the more children that are born. So we already had 6. So we get number 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. 17 that are named here, adding these 11 to the 6 from before. Solomon, we know where he comes in. It doesn't give us the mothers of the others. Are these the new wives? Does he ever have 2 children from the same wife? A little bit vague on that part, but wow, this is going to be a mess later on. When the Philistines heard that David had been designated king over Israel, they all went up to search for David. When David heard about it, he went down to the fortress. Okay, so David had been fighting alongside the Philistines. Now the Philistines are going to come against David. Why do they not try to go and make negotiations? He had fought alongside of them. Why do they come up against him? Now, there was one king in particular who had been alongside of him. His name escapes me, but it doesn't mention him by name, so maybe he's not among them. They'll be singing and praising and trumpets playing, dancing in the streets. Yes, exactly. So the Philistines arrive and spread out over the valley of Rephaim. So David asked the Lord, should I march up against the Philistines? Will you hand them over to me? We've noticed this pattern before. Before David goes to battle, he is usually inquiring of God, should he go, should he stay, or should he go? What will the outcome be? Saul didn't do that. One of the downfalls of Saul is he did things of his own accord without inquiry of God. David here is continuing the pattern of inquiring of God. So now it's no longer telling us who he's inquiring of. He did have one priest with him who had an ephod while he was fleeing from Saul, that he inquired of God regularly. Not sure here who he's inquiring God of, how he's inquiring God doesn't tell us, simply that he does. So march up. Indeed, I will hand the Philistines over. So David does. He marches to Baal Perazim. He defeats them. The Lord has burst against the enemies like water, so he called the name Baal Perazim. The name means Lord of the outburst. So Baal can be and does become the name of a god, but Baal also is the generic, or Baal, for Lord. So it'd be like sir, like we use it today, but we have other titles that develop later. So Baal starts out as a reference to someone who is a lord, and later it becomes the god who is on high in the Canaanites. So here just being used apparently as Lord and not God, because David is using it. The Philistines abandon their idols there, and the men pick them up. This is an interesting thing. Yeah, for idols, the LXX and Vulgate say gods. So if there's idols left there, they're picking them up. What are they doing with them? It doesn't say. Are they destroying them? I hope so. The Philistines again came up and spread out of the Rephaim, and David went to the Lord. This time the Lord said, do not march straight up. Instead, circle around behind them and come up against them opposite the trees. When you hear the sound of marching in the top of the trees, act decisively. For at that moment, the Lord is going to strike down the army of the Philistines. So the Philistines come up again, inquire again. Here's one thing it's not telling us. How's he inquiring? How's he getting the message? This time, it can't just be a simple yes-no answer. It's no, go around from behind, come through the trees. When you hear them marching over the top of the trees, in other words, the heavenly host army descending upon them, will then go up and fight, and they'll be delivered. David did just as the Lord commanded, and he struck down the Philistines from Gibeon all the way to Gezer. So he is successful in what he does. He inquires of God in what he does. This is a great way for David to start out as king.